Nobody in Cedar Hollow, Idaho ever questioned the life of Caleb Mercer. At 34, he was known as the kind of man neighbors trusted without hesitation. He woke before dawn, worked until his hands cracked, and spoke little unless spoken to. His small farmhouse sat at the edge of town, surrounded by pastureland and a modest dairy barn he had built from scrap wood and borrowed money in his 20s. People saw stability when they looked at him. A wife. 2 children. Cows grazing peacefully under the open sky. It looked like the kind of American life people believed was unbreakable. Elara Mercer, his wife, once believed that too. She had married Caleb young, full of faith that love and effort were enough. Together they survived poverty, sleepless nights, and the exhausting years of raising children. Their son Rowan was now 8, their daughter Maeve 5. Elara spent her days juggling housework, childcare, and helping with the farm when needed. By nightfall, her body ached in ways she never talked about. She told herself this was normal. Marriage wasn't supposed to feel exciting forever. Stability mattered more. What Elara didn't realize was that silence had been growing between them like rot inside a beam. It didn't creak. It didn't announce itself. It just weakened everything quietly. Caleb still kissed her forehead before bed. Still worked hard. Still played with the kids. But something inside him had been eroding for years, unspoken and unresolved. The first sign Elara noticed came in fragments. Caleb started leaving the bed late at night. At first she assumed it was the animals. Dairy cows didn't care about human schedules. Sometimes they needed checking. Sometimes storms spooked them. That explanation made sense, and Elara never questioned it. She trusted her husband. But the nights kept repeating. Again and again, just after midnight or close to dawn, Caleb would rise slowly, careful not to wake her. The mattress barely dipped. The door opened without a sound. When Elara asked, his answers were always calm, always short. Just checking the barn. Nothing defensive. Nothing suspicious on the surface. Still, something felt off. Elara began to notice changes she couldn't explain. Caleb spoke less. His eyes lingered in empty spaces. He sat alone on the porch long after dark. He wasn't cruel or distant in obvious ways, just absent. And absence, Elara would later realize, can be more dangerous than anger. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things. Life was stressful. Kids were demanding. Farms were unforgiving. But the unease stayed. A quiet pressure in her chest that refused to fade. One night, lying awake beside him, she listened as he slipped out of bed again. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a sense that something fundamental was about to change. For the first time in her life, Elara questioned whether trust alone was enough to protect a marriage. She didn't know yet that this night would split her life into before and after. She didn't know that what she was about to discover would challenge not only her love for Caleb, but her understanding of responsibility, boundaries, and forgiveness. All she knew was that a door had closed softly in the dark, and somewhere beyond it, the truth was waiting. Morning in Cedar Hollow always arrived quietly. A pale wash of light slid over the fields, dew clinging to the grass like a second skin. Elara woke before the children, as she always did, her body moving on habit alone. She brewed coffee, packed lunches, and listened to the low hum of the farm coming to life. Caleb was already outside. He always was. From the kitchen window, she watched him cross the yard toward the barn, shoulders tense, steps heavy. He moved like a man carrying weight no one else could see. Once, years ago, she would have followed him, wrapped her arms around his waist, joked about how early he worked. Now she simply stood there, mug cooling in her hands, wondering when that closeness had slipped away. Their marriage hadn't broken all at once. It had thinned over time, stretched by responsibility and exhaustion until it barely resembled what it once was. After Maeve was born, Ilara's world narrowed. Feedings, laundry, doctor visits. Endless days that blurred together. By nightfall, her mind still raced even when her body gave out. When Caleb reached for her, she often pulled away without thinking. "I'm tired." "Not tonight. The kids will wake up." At first, Caleb accepted it quietly. He told himself this was temporary. Parenthood changed people. He loved Ilara. He loved his children. Wanting more felt selfish. So he swallowed the frustration, night after night, convincing himself that patience was the same as strength. But patience, when paired with silence, can slowly become resentment. Caleb never said he felt unwanted. He never admitted the loneliness that settled in even while lying beside his wife. He believed a good man endured. He believed providing was enough. And so he worked harder, slept less, and buried his needs deeper. Ilara noticed the distance but misunderstood it. She thought Caleb was simply tired. Farms were brutal. Money was tight. She believed love didn't need constant attention once a family was built. Stability in her mind meant everything was fine. The truth was neither of them knew how to speak anymore. Conversations became functional. Who would pick up the kids? What needed fixing? Which bill was due? There were no arguments, but there was no warmth either. And that emptiness made everything else louder in Caleb's head. The nights became his escape. Stepping out of the house felt like breathing again. The cold air. The familiar sounds of the animals. The barn was predictable in a way people weren't. No expectations. No rejection. Just routine. Ilara began tracking time without meaning to. She noticed how long he was gone. She noticed how he avoided her eyes when he returned. Once, she reached for him in the morning and felt him stiffen, as if afraid of being seen. That moment unsettled her more than any argument could have. She considered asking directly. But fear stopped her. Fear of answers she couldn't handle. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being right. By the end of that week, Ilara was no longer just uneasy. She was alert. Listening. Watching. The trust she had built her life on was still there, but it now carried a crack so fine it could only be felt, not seen. And deep in the quiet rhythm of Cedar Hollow, something irreversible was already in motion. The decision to follow Caleb did not come from anger. It came from exhaustion. Ilara had reached a point where uncertainty hurt more than the truth ever could. For days, she moved through her routine with a strange clarity, as if her body already knew what her mind was refusing to accept. She laughed with the children, cooked meals, folded clothes, but beneath every motion was the same thought repeating quietly. Something is wrong. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. The air was still, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper. Rowan and Maeve were asleep by 9, their soft breathing drifting down the hallway. Ilara lay beside Caleb, facing the ceiling, counting the seconds between his breaths. She did not close her eyes. She waited. Just past 1 in the morning, it happened again. Caleb shifted slowly, with practiced care. The mattress dipped, barely enough to notice, but Ilara felt it immediately. He paused, listening, as if measuring whether she was awake. Then he stood, dressed quietly, and slipped out of the room. The door clicked shut with the gentlest sound imaginable. Ilara's heart pounded so hard she feared it would give her away. She waited longer than she needed to, forcing herself to breathe evenly. When the house settled back into silence, she rose, pulled on a jacket, and stepped into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under her bare feet, louder than they ever had before. Outside, The night was cold and vast. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the yard. Elara stayed close to the shadows, every sense alert. She could see Caleb ahead of her, a dark figure moving steadily toward the barn, a flashlight swinging lightly in his hand. He did not look back. Each step felt unreal, as though she were watching herself from a distance. Part of her hoped he would turn around, laugh, tell her she was being foolish. But he kept going. The barn door opened. Light spilled briefly onto the dirt, then vanished as it closed behind him. Elara stopped a short distance away. The smell of hay and damp earth filled the air. Her hands were shaking now. She pressed them together, trying to ground herself. This was the point of no return. Whatever she saw next would stay with her forever. She moved closer, slowly, carefully, until she reached the side of the barn. A narrow gap between wooden planks allowed a sliver of light to escape. Elara leaned forward, her breath caught in her throat. She told herself she was ready. She was not. Inside, Caleb stood alone, his posture tense, his movements unfamiliar. He was not checking equipment. He was not tending to an animal in distress. Whatever he was doing, it was deliberate, intentional, private. Elara's mind raced, searching for explanations that could still make sense of the man she loved. Maybe he was ill. Maybe he was hiding something unrelated. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But the longer she watched, the harder it became to deny that this secret was something far darker than she had imagined. Her legs felt weak. Her stomach turned. The barn, once a symbol of their shared effort and survival, now felt like a place she no longer recognized. A place where the rules she believed in did not apply. She did not scream. She did not move. She simply stood there, frozen, as the truth pressed in on her from all sides. In that moment, Elara understood that some discoveries do not arrive with noise or violence. They arrive quietly, reshaping everything you thought you knew, leaving you to decide whether to run or confront what can no longer be unseen. Elara did not remember deciding to step forward. Her body moved before her thoughts caught up, driven by a surge of emotion too powerful to contain. Shock gave way to disbelief, disbelief collapsed into anger, and anger finally broke the paralysis that had held her in place. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound cutting through the stillness like a blade. Caleb froze. He turned slowly, as if hoping what he saw wasn't real. When his eyes met Elara's, the color drained from his face. For a split second, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was unbearable, thick with everything that had been hidden, denied, and misunderstood for years. "What are you doing?" Elara's voice shook, but it carried across the barn with a clarity that startled even her. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands trembled. He looked like a man caught between shame and panic, unable to choose which would destroy him faster. He tried to speak, but no words came. Elara stepped closer, each footfall heavy, deliberate. Her chest burned. Her mind screamed for answers, for something that would make this moment less real. "Explain it," she said, her voice rising despite her effort to control it. "Tell me what I'm seeing. Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Caleb dropped his gaze. The man who had faced storms, debt, and exhaustion without complaint now looked impossibly small. "I don't know how," he muttered. "I didn't plan for you to see this." That was when the weight of it truly hit her. This wasn't a mistake caught in the moment. This was a secret. One carried carefully, repeatedly, under the cover of darkness. The realization cut deeper than anger ever could. Elara felt tears spill over, hot and uncontrollable. "How long?" she demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" Caleb's shoulders sagged. He wiped his face with shaking hands. "Too long," he said quietly. Rage surged through her, sharp and consuming. "We built this life together," she said, her words tumbling out. "We raised children here. I trusted you with everything I am. And this is what you do behind my back." Caleb finally looked at her then, his eyes red, filled with a mixture of regret and desperation. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. "I swear I didn't." Elara laughed bitterly. The sound surprised them both. "You didn't want to hurt me," she repeated. "Do you hear yourself?" For a moment, Caleb seemed to crumble. He leaned against a stole, his breathing uneven. "I felt invisible," he said at last. "I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. Every night I tried, I felt shut out. I felt alone in my own house." His words struck her harder than she expected. Not because they excused anything, but because part of her recognized the truth in them. She had been distant. She had been tired. She had chosen survival over connection. But hearing him frame his actions that way felt like a betrayal layered on top of another betrayal. "So you chose this?" she asked quietly. "Instead of talking to me? Instead of asking for help?" Caleb lowered his head. "I hate myself for it. I didn't know how to stop." Elara wiped her face, forcing herself to breathe. The anger was still there, roaring beneath her ribs, but now it was joined by grief. The man she thought she knew was gone. In his place stood someone fractured, capable of choices she never imagined. "This doesn't end tonight," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You don't get to apologize and pretend it's over. Something in you is broken, and if you want to keep this family, you're going to face it." Caleb nodded, tears sliding down his face. He looked terrified, not of being caught, but of losing everything he had taken for granted. Elara turned away, unable to look at him any longer. As she walked out of the barn, the cold night air hit her like a shock. She didn't stop moving until the house was in sight. Behind her, the barn stood silent again, holding a secret that would never truly be buried. Inside the house, Elara closed the door softly, just as Caleb had done so many nights before. She leaned against it, her body finally giving in to the weight of what had happened. The marriage she knew was gone. What remained was uncertainty, pain, and a decision she wasn't ready to make but knew she could no longer avoid. The hours after that night passed without shape or order. Elara did not sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed until dawn, staring at the wall as if it might explain what her mind refused to settle. Every memory of her marriage replayed itself differently now, as though the past had been quietly rewritten while she wasn't looking. Moments she once believed were simple fatigue or distance now carried a new, unbearable weight. When morning came, it arrived without mercy. Rowan and Maeve woke laughing, unaware that the ground beneath their family had shifted. Elara forced herself to move, to smile, to function. She made breakfast. She tied shoelaces. She kissed foreheads. Each small act felt mechanical, but necessary. The children deserved normalcy, at least for now. Caleb stayed quiet. He hovered at the edges of rooms, unsure where he was allowed to exist. His eyes followed Elara constantly, searching for permission, forgiveness, or instruction. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict he already feared. It wasn't until the children left for school that Elara finally turned to him. Her voice was calm, but there was something immovable behind it. "We need to talk," she said. Not angrily. Not softly. Final. They sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating dust in the air, the ordinary details of a life that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Elara folded her hands together, grounding herself before speaking. "What happened last night doesn't disappear," she said. "It doesn't get fixed with guilt or promises. I need you to understand that." Caleb nodded quickly, his throat tight. I know I destroyed something. You didn't just destroy trust, Elara continued. You changed how I see you. How I feel safe around you. That matters. He lowered his head. Tell me what to do. The words angered her more than she expected. That's the problem, she said. I'm not your solution. I'm not responsible for fixing what you broke. Silence settled between them again, heavier this time but clearer. Elara stood, pacing slowly, as if each step helped organize her thoughts. If this family is going to survive at all, things change now. Completely. Caleb looked up, eyes wide. You get professional help, she said. Not later. Not when it's convenient. Immediately. You face whatever led you here, without excuses and without blaming me. I will, he said quickly. I swear. And I decide whether I stay, Elara added. Not today. Maybe not soon. You don't pressure me. You don't rush me. You don't ask for intimacy, forgiveness, or comfort. Those are no longer yours to expect. Caleb's breath hitched, but he nodded. I understand. Elara stopped pacing and faced him fully. This is your only chance. 1. If I see dishonesty, avoidance, or denial again, I leave. I take the kids. There will be no second conversation. The words hung in the air, sharp and irreversible. Caleb looked like a man finally grasping the scale of what he stood to lose. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice breaking. I already lost something, Elara replied. What happens next determines whether I lose everything else. That afternoon, Caleb made the call. He didn't delay. He didn't ask Elara to help. He sat alone on the porch, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders shaking as he spoke words he never imagined saying aloud. Elara watched from inside, not with hope, but with cautious observation. Effort mattered. Consistency mattered more. The days that followed were tense and quiet. There were no arguments, but there was no closeness either. They moved around each other like strangers sharing borrowed space. Caleb attended his appointments. He came home subdued, reflective, sometimes shaken. He spoke only when spoken to. He did not touch Elara unless necessary. Elara noticed the changes, but she did not reward them. Trust, she knew now, was not rebuilt by visible effort alone. It required time. And time did not obey apologies. At night, she lay awake listening to Caleb breathe beside her, the space between them heavier than distance. She didn't know yet whether forgiveness was possible. She only knew that survival for herself and her children required clarity, boundaries, and strength she never expected to need. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about deciding whether the man she loved was capable of becoming someone she could live beside again. Time did not heal anything on its own. It only revealed patterns. Elara learned that quickly. Days turned into weeks, and the initial shock gave way to a slower, heavier process that demanded far more than emotional reactions. What remained was effort measured in consistency, not intensity. Caleb kept his word. He attended every appointment without being reminded. He spoke openly, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes painfully, about loneliness, shame, and the years he had spent confusing endurance with emotional silence. The sessions did not excuse his choices, but they forced him to confront them without hiding behind guilt or self-pity. He began to understand that what he had done was not a single failure, but the result of years of avoidance and poor communication. At home, change was quiet. There were no dramatic gestures. No sudden declarations. Caleb woke earlier than before, not to escape into work, but to prepare breakfast for the children. He helped with homework. He listened when Elara spoke and accepted when she chose silence instead. He did not reach for her at night. He did not ask how long he had to wait. He learned restraint, something he had never practiced before. Elara watched all of this carefully. She did not soften quickly. Forgiveness, she realized, was not something she could decide to feel. It would either come naturally or not at all. What she focused on instead was safety. Emotional safety. Predictability. Whether the man in her house was becoming someone she could trust again. Some nights were harder than others. Memories surfaced without warning. A sound. A smell. A moment of quiet that felt too familiar. On those nights, Elara would sit alone on the porch, staring into the dark fields, reminding herself that she was allowed to take up space, to take time, to prioritize her own stability. Caleb noticed her distance but did not challenge it. Instead, he wrote pages and pages of private reflections he never asked her to read. Writing became his way of holding himself accountable without placing the burden on her. The children sensed change without understanding it. Rowan became more talkative, asking questions about everything. Maeve clung to Elara more than before. Elara responded with patience, determined that whatever happened between the adults would not damage the foundation her children stood on. One evening, weeks later, Elara finally spoke first. Not about the past. Not about forgiveness. About boundaries. About what she needed if this family was going to continue under one roof. Caleb listened without interruption. He agreed without negotiation. That moment mattered more than any apology he had ever offered. Their marriage did not return to what it had been. And it never would. What they were building now was something different. More fragile. More honest. Less romanticized. Elara understood that staying was a choice she renewed daily, not a promise she owed. Caleb understood that love was not proven by suffering in silence, but by showing up correctly, even when it was uncomfortable. Nothing was guaranteed. Trust was still incomplete. Pain had not vanished. But the secrecy had ended, and with it, the illusion that endurance alone could save a relationship. In Cedar Hollow, life continued quietly. The farm still needed work. The children still laughed. And inside a small farmhouse at the edge of town, two people learned that surviving a marriage was sometimes harder than starting one, and that accountability, not denial, was the only place healing could begin.